What would happen if the newborn child of one of the most powerful men in the country could only find peace in the arms of a complete stranger? This is perhaps the most deeply moving and soul-stirring story I have shared in a very long time. It is a story about a baby who would not stop screaming, a father paralyzed by the weight of his own helplessness, and a woman whose humble presence would change their lives forever. Prepare your heart, because what you are about to hear will touch the deepest corners of your soul and likely move you to tears. The piercing, heartbreaking cries of the infant echoed through every sterile corner of the neonatal intensive care unit at Seattle Grace Memorial. For more than 5 grueling hours, the small boy had been trapped in a cycle of inconsolable distress, and the team of world-renowned specialists was beginning to lose hope. The nurses took turns using every swaddle, every temperature-controlled blanket, and every advanced soothing technique known to modern medicine, but nothing, absolutely nothing, made a difference. The sound of his wails was so intense, so raw, that other families in the wing began to retreat into their rooms, their faces etched with a mixture of profound pity and sheer exhaustion. The tiny boy, barely 3 days old, seemed to be vibrating with a sorrow that no physical examination could explain. The medical staff checked his vitals repeatedly, looking for hidden infections, digestive blockages, or subtle neurological signals. On paper, he was a specimen of perfect health, yet he continued to scream as if his very spirit were being torn apart. No specialized formula, no rhythmic shushing, and no gentle rocking could bridge the gap to his peace. It was as if he had arrived in this world carrying a burden of grief far too heavy for such a small frame to bear. The sound of his suffering had become a haunting background noise for the entire floor, a reminder of the limitations of science when faced with the mysteries of the human heart. Elias Thorne stood by the high-tech incubator, his hands trembling as he gripped the cold metal rail. His eyes were bloodshot from days of sleeplessness, and the shadow of a thick, unkempt beard covered a face that was usually the image of corporate perfection. Elias was a titan of industry, a man whose real estate developments had redefined the Pacific Northwest skyline, yet in this moment, he felt like the most useless human being on the planet. "Why can't I help you, my little guy?" he whispered, his voice cracking like dry earth. His bespoke Italian suit, which usually commanded respect in every boardroom, was now wrinkled, stained with tears, and forgotten. His assistants and business partners had been calling his phone incessantly, desperate for his signature on a multi-billion-dollar merger, but Elias had turned the device off hours ago. Nothing in the world of steel, glass, and profit meant anything compared to the tiny life struggling in front of him. All his wealth, his prestige, and his vast holdings felt like hollow shells in the face of his son's agony. "Your mother would have known," he sobbed, leaning his forehead against the glass. "She had the magic. She was the one who knew how to make the world quiet." The loss of his wife, Clara, during the final moments of childbirth, had been a catastrophic blow that leveled Elias's world. She had been a pediatric nurse herself before they married, a woman who possessed a natural, almost supernatural connection with children. She had always said that infants could sense the electricity of the soul through the palms of one's hands. "Children don't listen to words, Elias," she used to tell him while they planned their nursery. "They listen to the heartbeat of the person holding them. They know who is at peace." Now standing in the sterile silence of the hospital, Elias felt only chaos within himself. He was a man fractured by grief, a father who felt his own brokenness was being transmitted to his son like a dark current. He wondered if the baby was screaming because he could sense that the man holding him was a hollowed-out shell, a father who didn't know how to love without the woman who had taught him how. The guilt was a suffocating shroud, making every breath a labor of pain. The nurses were running out of ways to comfort the grieving father. The head nurse, a woman named Margaret with 40 years of experience in the trenches of human suffering, approached Elias with a gentle touch on his shoulder. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice seasoned with a kindness that only comes from witnessing 1,000 tragedies. "Sometimes babies carry the weight of the house they are entering. He misses the rhythm of the life he knew inside, just as you miss the woman who gave him to you." But these words, meant to offer a bridge of understanding, only served to sharpen Elias's internal blades. He felt responsible for the void in his son's life. He felt as if his own inability to find peace was the very thing keeping his son in torment. "What if I can never make him happy, Atta," he thought, watching the infant writhe in the incubator. "What if he always cries because he knows his father is a stranger to joy?" The desperation was becoming a physical pressure, a crushing weight in his chest that threatened to stop his own heart. The lead physician, Dr. Sterling, entered the room with a somber expression, his chart tucked under his arm like a shield. Elias, we've run every diagnostic possible. Physically, your son is perfect. There is no biological reason for this level of distress. The words felt like a death sentence of uncertainty. Then why won't he stop, doctor? Elias demanded, his voice rising in a mix of anger and absolute despair. Is he going to scream until he simply gives up? The doctor sighed, a sound of profound professional fatigue. Sometimes newborns experience a sensory overload that we can't quantify. But in my 30 years, I've never seen a child fight this hard against the world. Elias looked at the floor, feeling the absolute limits of his power. He's searching for a frequency I can't provide, he whispered. The doctor had no answer for the truth in Elias's eyes. Just then, a soft, tentative voice drifted from the doorway, cutting through the tension of the room like a silver thread. Excuse me. I didn't mean to intrude, but I think I can help. Sarah Jenkins had come to the hospital that evening to visit her elderly uncle, who was recovering from a fall. She was carrying a small bag of books and a thermos of tea, her clothes simple and worn, a faded corduroy jacket over a simple cotton dress. Sarah was a woman whose life was written in the quiet, graceful lines around her eyes, a woman who moved with a dignity that didn't require a title. As she had walked past the pediatric wing, the sound of the baby's cry had stopped her in her tracks. It wasn't just a sound. It was a physical sensation that pulled at a chord deep within her own chest. She had stood in the hallway for nearly 20 minutes, her own breathing sinking with the infant's ragged gasps. Before we see if Elias allows this stranger to touch his son, I want to invite you to reflect on something. Have you ever felt a sudden, inexplicable pull towards someone in pain, as if your soul recognized a task it was born to perform? If you believe that these moments of coincidence are actually the universe working in our favor, please join our community by subscribing. We share these stories to remind each other that even in our darkest hours, a light can appear from the most unexpected places. Tell us in the comments, have you ever been a stranger who stepped in to help? Or has a stranger ever saved you? Sarah knew that cry because it was the echo of her own history. 10 years ago, she had lost her own child, a little girl named Rose, to a heart defect that no amount of prayer or medicine could fix. Sarah had never remarried, never had more children. She had spent a decade working as a quiet librarian in a small town outside the city, pouring her maternal energy into the books she curated and the children who came for story hour. But tonight, listening to this child, the protective walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. That baby isn't sick, she whispered to herself. That baby is lonely. She knew it was bold, perhaps even perceived as intrusive, to step into the room of a man who clearly came from a world of privilege she would never know. But the pull was magnetic. She felt as if her own daughter was whispering to her from the beyond, urging her to step into the light of that room. Sarah took a slow, grounding breath and walked into the suite, her presence immediately clashing with the high-tech machinery and the aura of expensive grief. Elias turned, his eyes narrowing in a defensive reflex. "This is a private area, Mom," he said, though the sharpness was tempered by his exhaustion. "I am so sorry for the intrusion, Mr. Thorne," Sarah said, her voice as steady as a heartbeat. "But I've been outside for a long time. I've heard him, and I think I know what he's looking for." Elias looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a reflection of a pain that matched his own, but a pain that had been refined into something gentle and wise. "I lost a child once," Sarah continued, stepping closer to the incubator with a quiet confidence. "And I know the sound of a spirit that feels like it's floating in the dark. Your son isn't in pain, Elias. He's just lost, and he's looking for a way back to the warmth." The words hit Elias with the force of a physical blow. "The doctors can't find anything," he whispered, his defenses finally dropping. "I can't find anything." Sarah offered a small, sad smile that carried the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. "That's because it's not something you find in a test. It's something you offer from the center of yourself. May I?" She gestured toward the crying child. Elias hesitated for a long, agonizing second, his protective instincts warring with a desperate, burgeoning hope. Finally, he stepped aside, the ghost of a nod giving her permission. "Please, if you can do anything, please." Sarah didn't rush the moment. She went to the sink and washed her hands with a slow, deliberate rhythm, her eyes closed as she performed a silent ritual of preparation. When she approached the infant, she didn't immediately reach for him. She leaned down and spoke to him first, her voice a low melodic hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air of the room. "It's okay, little soul, I hear you. You're not alone anymore. Someone is here who knows the way back." The moment her hands, warm, steady, and filled with the memory of her own child, slipped under the baby's back, a profound shift occurred in the atmosphere. The baby's cry didn't stop instantly, but the pitch changed. It went from a jagged scream of terror to a soft, questing whimper. As Sarah lifted him to her chest, she didn't rock him with the frantic energy of the nurses. She held him perfectly still, tucking his small, wet face right against the hollow of her neck, where he could feel the resonance of her pulse and the heat of her skin. She began to hum a series of low, deep notes, not a song but a vibration. Within 5 minutes, the room witnessed a miracle. The baby's body, which had been as rigid as stone for hours, suddenly melted against her. His breathing, which had been ragged and fast, slowed into a deep, rhythmic cadence. He closed his eyes, his tiny fingers latching onto the fabric of her simple jacket, and he fell into a sleep so profound it looked like a return to the womb. Elias fell back into a chair, his face buried in his hands, sobbing with a relief that was almost violent. "He's quiet," he gasped, the words muffled by his palms. How did you do that when no one else could?" Sarah looked down at the sleeping boy, her own eyes brimming with tears for the child she had lost and the one she was currently holding. "I didn't do it, Elias. We did it. He just needed to know that someone wasn't afraid of his sorrow." The silence in the room was no longer a heavy, suffocating thing. It was a healing balm. The monitors showed the baby's heart rate stabilizing into a perfect, healthy rhythm for the first time since his birth. Elias watched this woman, this stranger who had appeared like a ghost in his hour of need and felt a gratitude so intense it felt like a physical rebirth. "You're a miracle," he whispered. Sarah shook her head gently. "No, just a person who remembers how it feels to be unheard." As Sarah held the boy, she noticed a small distinct mark on his shoulder, a tiny pale birthmark in the shape of a crescent moon. She felt a jolt of electricity go through her body. It was the exact same mark her daughter Rose had carried in the very same spot. Sarah felt a chill of divine intervention, a sensation that the boundaries between heaven and earth had momentarily thinned. "Rose," she breathed, the name a silent prayer. She knew it was a coincidence of biology, but in the logic of the heart, it felt like a message. She felt as if she were being given a second chance to shepherd a soul through the darkness. "What is your name?" Elias asked, standing up and approaching her with a new sense of purpose. "Sarah. Sarah Hart," she replied. Elias looked at his son, then at Sarah, and made a decision that would defy every convention of his social circle. "Sarah, I have a life that is full of things but empty of peace. I have a house that is too large and a heart that is too broken. Please come with us. I don't want a nanny who clocks in and out. I want a guardian for my son's soul. I will give you anything, a home, security, whatever you need, if you will just help me raise him with the peace you just gave him." Clara looked at the child, then at the man whose wealth had clearly not protected him from the universal tax of grief. She thought of her quiet, lonely life and the empty rooms of her apartment. She saw a path opening, a way to turn her own tragedy into a shield for someone else. "I don't need your wealth, Mr. Thorne," she said with a quiet strength. "But I think this boy and I have a deal to make. I will stay as long as you promise me one thing, that this house will never be too busy for his heart." The move to the Thorne estate was a transition that would have intimidated anyone else. The mansion was a cold masterpiece of glass and steel, perched on a cliff overlooking the Sound. It was a place built to impress, not to comfort. There were no soft edges, no family heirlooms, and the air felt heavy with the scent of expensive floor wax and unexpressed mourning. Clara arrived with her few boxes of books and a sense of mission. On her first day, she walked into the industrial-sized kitchen and found 3 professional chefs. "Where is the wooden spoon?" she asked. "I need to make a stew. This house needs to smell like a home, not a hotel." Over the following months, Sarah began a quiet revolution within the walls of the mansion. She brought in warmth, texture, and the soft sounds of life. She spent every waking hour with the baby, whom Elias had named Oliver. Elias, who had previously been a ghost in his own home, found himself drawn back earlier and earlier each day. He would find Sarah in the nursery, the golden hour light spilling over the floor as she whispered stories to Oliver about the mountains and the sea. He would stand in the shadow of the doorway, watching the way his son looked at her with a trust that was absolute, and he felt the jagged edges of his own grief beginning to soften. "You've brought the light back, Sarah," Elias said one evening as they sat on the expansive deck, the sound of the waves crashing below. Oliver was sleeping in a bassinet between them, his breathing a steady comfort. "I used to think my legacy would be the buildings I left behind. Now I realize it's the peace in this child's eyes." Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on the stars. "Buildings are just shells, Elias. It's the breath inside them that matters. You were so busy building walls that you forgot to build windows." The journey was not without its trials. A woman from Elias's corporate world, a cold and ambitious executive named Victoria, who had hoped to marry into the Thorne fortune, arrived one afternoon and treated Sarah like a common interloper. "Elias, this is beneath you," Victoria hissed in the hallway. "A woman with no pedigree living in your home? People are talking. It's a liability." Elias looked at Victoria, then at the warmth emanating from the room where Sarah was singing to Oliver. He saw the difference between a person who wanted his power and a person who cared for his life. "Victoria," Elias said with a finality that brooked no argument, "Sarah is the foundation of this family. If you can't respect that, you have no place here." As the first year turned into a second, Oliver grew into a vibrant, laughing toddler. He took his first steps towards Sarah, his small hands reaching out for her with a cry of "Mama!" that sent a shockwave of emotion through the house. Sarah sat Elias down that night, her face pale. "He called me Mama, Elias. We need to honor his mother. We need to talk about Eleanor." Elias had buried Eleanor's name in a vault of pain, but Sarah wouldn't let him hide anymore. Together they created a legacy room filled with Eleanor's photos, her favorite books, and her journals. Sarah taught Oliver that he had a mother in the stars who watched over him, and a Sarah on earth who would walk beside him. The bond between Elias and Sarah evolved into a deep, unspoken partnership. It wasn't the fiery, impulsive romance of their youth, but a slow-burning, steady flame forged in the shared labor of healing. One evening, under a canopy of autumn leaves, Elias took Sarah's hand. "I thought my heart was a closed book," he said softly. "But you've been writing new pages every day. Sarah, you didn't just save my son. You saved the man I was meant to be." He didn't propose that night, but he gave her a key to the house that was made of gold, a symbol that she was no longer an employee but the heart of the home. As Oliver grew, so did their family's impact. Elias began using his vast resources to fund pediatric mental health centers and grief counseling for families who had lost mothers during childbirth. Sarah oversaw the foundations, ensuring that no father ever felt as alone as Elias had that night in the hospital. They became a beacon of hope in the city, a story of how tragedy can be the soil for a beautiful new garden. As we reach the conclusion of this story, I want to leave you with a thought. Is there a part of your life that feels like it's screaming in the dark? Is there a grief you've been trying to solve with logic instead of love? Our community here is a place for those who believe that the heart has its own reasons that reason does not know. If this journey moved you, please subscribe and share this video with someone who might be in their own hospital room tonight. Tell us in the comments. What did Sarah's courage teach you about the power of stepping into a stranger's life? We are so honored to have you as part of this family. Remember, your kindness is the only thing that truly lasts. Until our next story, take care of each other. The years passed with a grace that neither Elias nor Sarah could have predicted. Oliver became a young man of character, a boy who knew that his life had been saved by the touch of a woman who chose to care. On the 10th anniversary of that night at Seattle Grace, the three of them returned to the pediatric wing. They didn't bring press or cameras. They brought a simple donation and a basket of hand-knit blankets for the new mothers. Nurse Margaret, now retired but visiting the ward, recognized them instantly. She looked at Oliver, now a tall, confident 10-year-old, and then at Elias and Sarah, who stood close together, their hands entwined. "I knew it," Margaret whispered with a tearful smile. "I knew that night that I was witnessing the beginning of a masterpiece." Elias looked at Sarah, the woman who had walked into his life when he had nothing but money and a broken heart. He realized that the greatest real estate he had ever acquired was the space they had built together in each other's souls. "It wasn't a miracle," Elias whispered to the nurse. "It was just a woman who wasn't afraid to listen to a baby's cry." And Sarah, looking at the birthmark on Oliver's shoulder that still looked so much like her daughter's, knew that in the grand tapestry of the universe, Nothing is ever truly lost. Love simply finds a new way to come home. And so, this story of the billionaire and the stranger ends not with a bank balance, but with a legacy of peace. It reminds us that no matter how high we build our towers, it is the warmth of a hand and the rhythm of a steady heart that keep the world turning. May you find your own Sarah when the world gets loud, and may you have the courage to be a Sarah for someone else. God bless you, and we will see you in the next story. Take a moment to breathe, to love, and to remember that you are never truly alone. The end of this chapter is just the beginning of a life well lived. Goodbye for now.